He thought the badge made him untouchable. He was wrong. The July sun hung heavy over Maplewood Square, a small city park just outside downtown Savannah, Georgia, where heat shimmered above the pavement and every bench seemed to radiate warmth. Children chased each other through bursts of laughter near the fountain. Food trucks lined the curb. Music drifted from a nearby street performer playing old soul records through a crackling speaker. It looked like the kind of Saturday people remember fondly later. Then Officer Daniel Mercer decided to turn it into something else. Standing beside a city maintenance hose connected to a green spigot near the flower beds, Mercer wore mirrored sunglasses and the smug half-smile of a man too comfortable being watched. He had already drawn attention with the way he barked at teenagers for sitting on a low stone wall and scolded an elderly vendor for parking 6 inches over a painted line. But when Vanessa Brooks stepped across the walkway carrying a worn brown tote bag and a folded hospital visitor pass still clipped to her shirt, his focus shifted. She moved with tired grace, her pace steady, shoulders squared, eyes forward. She wore plain slacks, sensible shoes, and the expression of someone trying to get home after a long day. To Mercer, that seemed reason enough. He glanced at the small crowd gathering nearby, then at the hose in his hand, and grinned. "Hey," he called loudly, "park's closed for attitude checks." A few uneasy laughs slipped from the edges of the crowd. Vanessa slowed but did not answer. She had spent the last 4 hours beside her mother's hospital bed across town, listening to monitors hum and promises doctors couldn't quite make. She did not have energy for men who mistook noise for authority. Mercer twisted the nozzle. A sharp stream of water burst forward, splashing across the sidewalk and striking the ground near her feet. Gasps fluttered through the square. Vanessa stepped back once, more surprised than frightened. Mercer laughed harder. "Guess you missed the sign," he said, raising the hose again. This time the spray caught the side of her jacket and soaked the tote bag hanging from her shoulder. Phones lifted instantly. People always record the moment after they should have spoken. A mother pulled her son closer. A pair of college kids exchanged stunned looks. A vendor quietly turned off his grill fan so he could hear better. Vanessa stood still. Water dripped from the hem of her sleeve onto the hot concrete. Her curls clung slightly near her temple. She looked at Mercer the way a judge might look at a man who had mistaken arrogance for intelligence. No shouting. No tears. No scene. That calm unsettled him more than anger would have. "You got something to say now?" Mercer asked, louder this time, feeding on the silence. Vanessa glanced around the park. She saw faces full of discomfort, guilt, curiosity, fear. She saw a little boy tugging on his mother's hand and whispering, "Why is he doing that?" The mother had no answer. Some questions indict everyone present. Mercer stepped closer, dragging the hose behind him like a trophy. "Thought so," he muttered. "Always quiet when it matters." Vanessa slowly set her tote bag on a dry patch of sidewalk. Every movement was careful, measured, almost ceremonial. The crowd leaned in without realizing it. Even the street performer had stopped the music. Mercer's grin began to fade. There was something in the air now, something changing shape. Vanessa unzipped the bag and reached inside. Her soaked sleeve trembled once, then steadied. Mercer swallowed. For the first time all afternoon, Officer Daniel Mercer looked uncertain. Vanessa did not rush. That was the first thing everyone noticed. In a world addicted to panic, her calm felt louder than shouting. Water still slid from the cuff of her jacket as she reached into the tote bag and pulled out a slim black case no bigger than a paperback book. Officer Mercer tried to recover the swagger that had slipped from his face. "That better be identification," he said, forcing a laugh that nobody joined. Vanessa opened the case with steady hands. Inside was a polished badge bearing a federal seal, a photo ID, and a folded document stamped in dark blue ink. The sunlight caught the metal and flashed across Mercer's mirrored lenses. He removed the sunglasses so quickly it looked involuntary. "Vanessa Brooks," she said, voice level and clear enough for the entire square to hear. "Senior investigator, Civil Rights Oversight Division." The park went silent in layers. First the teenagers near the fountain. Then the food truck line. Then even the pigeon seemed to stop moving. Mercer blinked twice as if reality had become difficult to focus on. "That is not funny," he said, but the confidence was gone. "Good," Vanessa replied. "Because I am not joking." She lifted the folded document. "This is a federal authorization order regarding repeated complaints of misconduct, harassment, and selective enforcement by members of this precinct." Murmurs spread through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. A man near the benches whispered, "I knew it." A woman who had been recording lowered her phone, then raised it again with renewed purpose. Mercer looked around for backup, for someone to laugh, for anyone to restore the old balance of power. Nobody moved. Vanessa took one step forward. "Officer Mercer, you have been named in 3 prior complaints over the last 11 months. His jaw tightened. "Those were dismissed." "No," she said. "They were delayed." She reached back into the case and removed a small rectangular device with a blinking green light. "And this has been transmitting live audio and video for the last 14 minutes. Mercer stared at the device as though it were something dangerous. In a way, it was. Truth usually is. "You set me up," he snapped, voice cracking at the edges. Vanessa's expression never changed. "No, officer. I gave you time. You used it poorly." Several people in the crowd exhaled at once. The little boy from earlier tugged on his mother's sleeve again, but this time she whispered, "Watch." Mercer stepped backward, nearly catching his shoe on the hose stretched behind him. Water continued spilling across the pavement in a careless stream, pooling around the boots he had once planted with such pride. He reached for his radio, then stopped when he noticed 2 black SUVs turning slowly into the park entrance. Their engines hummed low and controlled. Doors opened almost in sync. Men and women in plain clothes stepped out, earpieces visible, badges at their waists. The square that had felt like Mercer's stage moments ago now belonged to someone else entirely. "Vanessa," said a tall agent approaching from the lead vehicle. "We have everything." Mercer's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Sweat traced down the side of his face. "Now hold on," he said, trying to smile. "This was a misunderstanding. We were joking around." The crowd answered with a sound sharper than laughter. Vanessa looked at him for a long second, the kind of silence that forces a person to hear himself clearly. "Jokes require consent," she said. "Humiliation does not." Mercer's shoulders sagged. The hose slipped from his hand and clattered against the concrete. Water arced uselessly into the flower bed. For the first time in many years, Officer Daniel Mercer looked exactly like what he was when the badge meant nothing at all, just a man who had made a terrible mistake in public. The agents did not hurry. People who carry real authority rarely need to. They crossed the park with calm steps, scanning faces, noting phones, measuring reactions. The tall man who had spoken to Vanessa stopped 3 feet from Officer Mercer and held out a hand. "Badge," he said. No raised voice. No threat. Just certainty. Mercer glanced around as if someone from his precinct might appear and reverse the scene. No patrol cars entered. No sirens came to rescue him. The city he had relied on suddenly felt far away. "I need to call my supervisor," Mercer said, trying to steady his breathing. "You may do that after we finish here," the agent replied. "Badge." With fingers that no longer looked confident, Mercer unclipped it from his chest and handed it over. The click of metal leaving fabric sounded strangely final. A woman in a navy blazer stepped beside Vanessa and offered her a clean towel from a small supply kit. Vanessa thanked her softly and dried her hands before smoothing the soaked sleeve of her jacket. Even now, she moved with composure that made everyone else seem rushed. "You knew he would do something," the woman said quietly. Vanessa looked toward the puddle spreading near the flower beds. "I knew he would choose who he really was when he thought there would be no consequences." Nearby, the crowd had changed. Minutes earlier it had been a passive audience. Now it was a jury of whispers. The food vendor who had watched in silence stepped forward first. "I have footage from the beginning," he said, raising his phone. Then a college student spoke up. "I recorded too." Then a mother. Then an elderly man near the chess tables. Truth, once invited, arrived in numbers. Mercer's face drained further with each volunteer. He turned to Vanessa. "Listen, Ms. Brooks, I made a mistake. We can talk this out." She met his eyes for the first time since revealing the badge. "You had many chances to talk," she said. "You chose performance instead." One of the agents opened a tablet and began reviewing complaints tied to Mercer's name. Another spoke with witnesses, collecting statements with practiced efficiency. The square that had once felt ordinary now resembled a place where history quietly changes. Children were called closer by parents. The street performer resumed playing music, but softly now, as if respecting the moment. Mercer tried once more. "I was under stress. Long shift. He gets to people." The tall agent did not look up. He did not turn on the hose. A few people nodded. Excuses always sound smaller when spoken aloud. Vanessa reached into her tote bag again and removed the wrinkled hospital pass clip to her shirt. She stared at it for a second before tucking it into a dry pocket. Mercer noticed. "Hospital?" he asked, voice almost human now. "My mother," Vanessa said. "Chemotherapy." The word landed heavier than shouting ever could have. Several people in the crowd lowered their eyes. Mercer opened his mouth, then closed it. There are moments when a person realizes apology cannot travel far enough. One of the agents approached Vanessa with a phone. "Ma'am, your mother's nurse called back. She says your mother is resting comfortably." Vanessa exhaled for what seemed like the first time all afternoon. "Thank you." She turned toward the gathered crowd. "If any of you have footage, send it. If any of you have stories, report them. Silence protects patterns." Heads nodded across the square. A woman wiped tears from her cheek. The little boy from earlier looked at Mercer and then at Vanessa. "Is he in trouble now?" he asked. Vanessa crouched slightly so she could answer at eye level. "He is being held accountable." The boy considered that carefully, then smiled like he had learned a new word worth keeping. The tall agent signaled to his team. "Officer Mercer, you will come with us for questioning." Mercer did not argue this time. He glanced at the abandoned hose still spilling water into the dirt, then at the crowd who no longer feared him, then at Vanessa standing calm beneath the hot Georgia sun. Power had left him so quietly he almost seemed surprised to feel the emptiness. By late afternoon, Maplewood Square looked ordinary again, at least from a distance. The fountain ran. Food trucks served long lines. Children laughed as if the world had never paused. But close enough to hear the conversations, you knew something had shifted. People spoke softer, stood straighter, and watched uniforms differently. Officer Daniel Mercer sat in the back seat of a dark SUV parked near the curb, the door open, two investigators nearby reviewing notes on tablets. No handcuffs, no spectacle, no raised voices. Accountability did not need theater. It only needed witnesses. Vanessa Brooks remained near the stone benches where the whole scene had begun. Her jacket was still damp, though the Georgia heat had nearly dried the fabric. She accepted a paper cup of iced tea from the food vendor who had first offered his footage. "On the house," he said. Vanessa smiled faintly. "Nothing is free," she replied. "But kindness comes close." The vendor laughed and walked back to his truck looking 10 years lighter. Across the square, more residents had gathered after hearing what happened. Some came curious. Some came angry. Some came carrying stories they had kept too long. A middle-aged mechanic named Curtis said Mercer once ticketed him 3 times in 1 month for parking in front of his own shop. A nurse said she had been stopped and questioned walking home after a night shift. A teenage girl said Mercer searched her backpack because she was sitting alone on a bench, waiting for her father. Each story by itself had been easy to dismiss. Together, they sounded like a pattern with a badge. Vanessa listened to every person without interrupting. She wrote names, dates, locations. She did not promise miracles. She promised process, which in many places is rarer. If you file it properly, it cannot be erased so easily, she told them. The sentence moved through the crowd like hope learning to stand up. Near the SUV, Mercer stared out the open door, hearing enough to know the tide had turned. He had spent years believing complaints expired if ignored long enough. Now they were returning with names attached. He called out softly, almost embarrassed by the sound of his own voice. "Ms. Brooks." Vanessa walked over, stopping a respectful distance away. He did not meet her eyes at first. "I was wrong," he said. "About today?" "About a lot." She waited. Silence can ask better questions than words. "I thought control meant respect," he continued. "I thought people feared me because I mattered." Vanessa looked toward the families in the park. "Fear is rented," she said. "Respect is earned." Mercer finally looked up. The arrogance that once sat on his face had been replaced by something unfamiliar and unsteady. "Do you think they will fire me?" he asked. Vanessa considered him for a moment. "That is not the first question you should be asking." He frowned. "Then what is?" Her answer came without heat, without triumph, without cruelty. "How many people changed their route home because of you? How many children learned to distrust the law because of you? How many decent officers had their names darkened by what you made normal?" Mercer lowered his head. "Some lessons arrive late and still hurt." One of the investigators approached with a folder. "Vehicle is ready. We need to continue downtown." Mercer nodded weakly and rose from the seat. Before stepping into the vehicle, he turned once more toward the square. People were not glaring at him. They were simply no longer afraid. That hurt more than anger ever could. Vanessa returned to the bench and checked her phone. A message from the nurse read, "Your mother is awake and asking if you ate lunch." Vanessa laughed quietly under her breath. Even on difficult days, mothers remain mothers. She typed back, "On my way soon." Around her, strangers who had been silent hours earlier were now speaking to one another like neighbors again. Sometimes justice does not roar through a city. Sometimes it begins in a park, under a hot sun, when one person refuses to bow and everyone else remembers they do not have to either. The ride to St. Agnes Medical Center took 12 minutes, though the city felt different enough to make it seem longer. Vanessa Brooks drove with the windows cracked, letting warm evening air move through the car and carry away the smell of sun-dried pavement still clinging to her jacket. Traffic lights blinked from red to green across Savannah like tired eyes. She passed storefronts closing for the day, families gathering on porches, and people walking dogs under skies turning gold at the edges. Ordinary life had resumed all around her. That was the strange thing about public moments. They feel enormous while happening, then the world keeps moving. Inside the hospital, the air changed at once. Cool, clean, quiet. Shoes softened against polished floors. Voices lowered automatically. No one cared about badges here. No one cared who had won an argument in a park. Here, power belonged to nurses, timing, and test results. Vanessa checked in at the front desk and took the elevator to the 4th floor oncology wing. Her reflection in the brushed steel doors looked composed, but she could still see dried water marks on one sleeve. She almost laughed. Some stains are easier to remove than others. Room for 17 was half lit by sunset. Her mother, Eleanor Brooks, sat upright in bed with reading glasses low on her nose and a crossword puzzle balanced on a blanket. Even after treatment, Eleanor carried herself like a woman who had never accepted weakness as permanent. She looked up once, then narrowed her eyes at Vanessa's damp jacket. "You are late," she said. And either it rained on one shoulder only, or something foolish happened. Vanessa kissed her forehead. "Good evening to you too." Eleanor folded the puzzle carefully. Sit down and tell the truth first. Vanessa pulled the visitor chair close and Saturday. She told the story plainly, without drama, without trying to sound brave. The hose. The crowd. The badge. The investigators. Eleanor listened with hands folded, expression unreadable. When Vanessa finished, silence filled the room for a moment. Then her mother sighed. I raised you to be patient, she said. Sometimes I worry I overdid it. Vanessa laughed, the first full laugh of the day. Eleanor reached for her hand. Her grip was lighter than it used to be, but still firm enough to steady a room. Did you humiliate him? She asked. No good. Eleanor nodded once. Humiliation teaches very little. Consequences teach more. Vanessa looked at the machines beside the bed, at the clear bag hanging on the pole, at the lines and numbers quietly measuring hope. I was angry, she admitted. Not just at him. At all of it. How easy it was for everyone to watch. Eleanor tapped her daughter's knuckles. And yet some of them spoke in the end. After. After is still better than never. A nurse entered with medication and smiled warmly at Vanessa. Your mother has been telling everyone on this floor that her daughter works for the government. Eleanor lifted her chin. Only when asked. The nurse chuckled. No one asked. When she left, the room felt lighter. Vanessa unpacked a paper bag from the hospital cafeteria and placed soup, crackers, and apple slices on the tray table. Eleanor eyed the meal suspiciously. This looks like punishment. It is low sodium, Vanessa said. Cruelty comes in many forms. Outside the window, evening deepened over the city. Streetlights came on one by one. Vanessa checked her phone and found 6 new witness messages, 3 video files, and a request from headquarters for a morning briefing. She set the phone face down. For 1 hour, the world could wait. Eleanor studied her daughter's tired face. You know what bothered that officer most? She asked. Vanessa shook her head. Not your badge. Not the investigators. You're calm. Small people panic when they cannot provoke pain. Vanessa sat with that truth. Some wisdom arrives softly and stays forever. Eleanor squeezed her hand again. Go home. Tonight. Sleep. Tomorrow, do your job. But tonight, be my daughter. Vanessa leaned back in the chair and watched the last sunlight fade from the room. For the first time all day, she felt something stronger than anger. Peace. Morning arrived with the kind of clear Georgia sunlight that makes buildings look cleaner than they are. By 8 o'clock, the federal field office downtown was already humming with printers, footsteps, and the low murmur of people who knew a long day had begun before coffee had a chance to help. Vanessa Brooks stepped through the glass doors carrying a folder thick with witness statements gathered overnight. Her jacket was dry now, pressed and sharp, but something in her posture had changed. She moved with the calm of someone who had been reminded exactly why her work mattered. In conference room B, a screen on the wall displayed paused video from Maplewood Square. Multiple angles. Multiple voices. No room for confusion. Her supervisor, Deputy Director Helen Ward, stood at the head of the table reviewing notes with 2 attorneys and 3 investigators. Helen was in her late 50s, silver hair immaculate, eyes sharp enough to make excuses feel embarrassed before they were spoken. She looked up as Vanessa entered. Tell me you slept, Helen said. Enough to remain civil, Vanessa replied. Good. We may need discipline more than anger today. The room settled. Videos began to play one by one. Mercer laughing near the hose. The first spray hitting the pavement. The second catching Vanessa's sleeve and bag. Witness reactions. The moment the badge appeared. Then his voice changing from command to plea in under 60 seconds. One attorney paused the screen. Jury would hate this, he muttered. Helen nodded. We are not building theater. We are building facts. Vanessa opened her folder and distributed copies. Overnight reports had multiplied. 14 fresh complaints. 7 corroborating statements tied to older incidents. 2 internal memos previously ignored. 1 anonymous submission naming supervisors who routinely dismissed conduct reports to avoid bad press. Patterns were no longer whispers. They were paper. Investigator Luis Ramirez leaned back in his chair and whistled softly. One park incident shook loose half a filing cabinet. Fear clogs systems, Vanessa said. Once it breaks, things move fast. At 9:15, a liaison from the city arrived wearing a nervous smile and an expensive suit. Assistant City Manager Thomas Reed introduced himself twice, as though titles might create trust. The city wants full cooperation, he said. And minimal disruption. Helen did not blink. Those goals often conflict. Reed cleared his throat. Officer Mercer has requested leniency based on years of service. Vanessa looked at him steadily. Years of service to whom? Silence answered first. Reed shifted papers that did not need shifting. He also states this was a misunderstanding under heat stress. Lewis almost laughed. Helen raised one finger and he stopped. Mr. Reed, she said, weather is not a legal defense for selective humiliation. Reed's smile thinned into something more honest. Understood. After he left, the room exhaled. Helen turned to Vanessa. You are lead on witness coordination. Keep civilians protected. Some of them are speaking publicly for the first time. Vanessa nodded. I will call each one personally. By noon, local stations were already running blurred clips from the park. Headlines spoke of investigation, suspension review, community outrage. But Vanessa cared less about cameras than callbacks. She spent the next 2 hours speaking with residents one by one. The nurse. The mechanic. The teenage girl. The food vendor. Some voices shook. Some came angry. Some apologized for staying silent yesterday. Vanessa told each of them the same thing. You are speaking now. That matters. During a brief pause, her phone lit up with a message from her mother. Crossword clue, 8 letters. Means justice delayed but not denied. Vanessa smiled despite herself and typed back, accounted. A second later came the reply, too many letters. Still correct. She laughed quietly in the empty office. Outside her window, Savannah moved through another ordinary day. Cars honked. Pedestrians crossed. Deliveries arrived. Yet somewhere beneath that routine, a machine that had ignored people for 2 long was finally making noise as it turned. And this time, Vanessa intended to keep it moving. By Wednesday afternoon, the city council chamber was full 30 minutes before the meeting began. Every wooden seat was taken. People lined the walls shoulder to shoulder. Reporters balanced notebooks on their knees. Camera lights glowed near the back like small moons. Savannah had seen routine meetings before, the kind where budgets were mumbled through and nobody remembered what was said by dinner. This would not be one of those days. Vanessa Brooks sat near the front beside Deputy Director Helen Ward and 2 attorneys from the Oversight Division. She wore a navy suit, simple earrings, and the same composed expression that had unsettled powerful men all week. In front of her rested a binder tabbed with statements, policies, timelines, and evidence. Across the aisle sat Assistant City Manager Thomas Reed, now looking far less polished than when he first arrived at the federal office. Beside him were the interim police chief and 2 city lawyers whispering urgently over papers no one seemed eager to read aloud. At precisely 2:00, the council chair struck the gavel once. This special session will address public concerns regarding officer misconduct, departmental oversight, and recommended actions. The room grew still. Public comments began first. Curtis the mechanic spoke about being ticketed outside his own shop. The nurse described walking home after midnight under suspicion simply for existing in the wrong place at the wrong hour. The teenage girl recounted having her backpack searched while waiting for her father. None of them shouted. They did not need to. Truth delivered plainly can be heavier than rage. Then the food vendor stepped to the podium and held up his phone. "I brought the video," he said. The screen behind the council lit up. Maplewood Square appeared in bright afternoon sun. Mercer laughing. The hose lifting. Water striking a woman who had done nothing but walk home from the hospital. A murmur rolled through the chamber, then sharpened into something colder. The clip continued to the moment Vanessa opened the case and revealed her badge. The crowd in the video gasped. So did the crowd in the chamber, even those who had already seen it online. Some moments remain powerful no matter how many times they replay. When the screen went dark, the council chair removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "you may proceed." Vanessa stood and walked to the podium. She did not open with accusation. She opened with arithmetic. In 18 months, she said, this department received 47 citizen complaints related to discourtesy, bias-based stops, retaliatory citations, or public humiliation. 11 were formally reviewed. 2 resulted in discipline. 0 resulted in structural reform. She turned one page. That is not a few bad moments. That is a functioning system of avoidance. Pens moved quickly across reporters' notebooks. The interim chief shifted in his seat. Reed stared at the table. Vanessa continued. People often ask how misconduct survives. It survives through silence, delay, and the comfort of believing someone else will speak. Her eyes moved across the chamber. Yesterday, ordinary people decided to speak. She recommended independent review boards, mandatory body camera retention audits, transparent complaint tracking, and supervisory accountability for dismissed reports. No grandstanding. No theatrics. Just solutions sharp enough to cut excuses apart. During questioning, one council member asked if the city was being unfairly judged by one officer's conduct. Vanessa answered without hesitation. One officer acted. Many others failed to stop what was already known. The room went so quiet even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. After 90 minutes, the vote came. Temporary suspension of implicated supervisors pending review. Immediate external audit of complaint handling. Emergency funding for civilian oversight implementation. Motion passed unanimously. Applause erupted before the gavel could restore order. Some people cried openly. Others simply sat still, stunned by what accountability sounded like when it finally arrived. As the chamber emptied, Thomas Reed approached Vanessa with a tired face and honest eyes. "I should have listened sooner," he said. Vanessa gathered her binder. "Sooner is better," she replied, "but later still counts if you change." Outside City Hall, sunlight spilled across the steps where residents stood talking like neighbors who had just remembered their own strength. Inside, behind closed doors, careers were being reconsidered. And somewhere in a hospital room across town, Eleanor Brooks was probably doing a crossword and smiling. Thursday morning brought rain, soft and steady, the kind that turns city streets reflective and makes traffic move with unexpected manners. Savannah seemed quieter after the council vote, as if the whole town had stayed up late thinking about itself. At the Federal Field office, Vanessa Brooks stood near the break room window with a paper cup of coffee gone lukewarm in her hand, watching drops race down the glass. Headlines were still rolling across local news screens mounted in the lobby. Oversight reforms approved. Internal reviews expand. Community speaks out. She had seen enough headlines in her career to know they glow brightly and fade fast unless someone keeps feeding them facts. Her phone buzzed with a message from Deputy Director Helen Ward. Interview Room 3. 10 minutes. Vanessa set down the coffee and walked the long hallway lined with framed commendations nobody ever read. Interview Room 3 was plain by design. Neutral walls. One table. 4 chairs. No windows. The kind of room where titles lose their shine quickly. Helen sat at the far end reviewing a legal pad. Beside her was investigator Luis Ramirez. Across from them sat Daniel Mercer in a pressed shirt without a badge, tie loosened, shoulders rounded in a way that seemed physically new. He looked smaller than he had in the park, though the room had not changed size. When Vanessa entered, Mercer stood halfway out of reflex, then sat again. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly. She took the remaining chair. Helen closed the pad. "This is voluntary cooperation," she said. "Answer truthfully and completely." Mercer nodded. Rain tapped softly somewhere beyond the walls. Lewis switched on the recorder. Questions began with dates, incidents, supervisors, complaint procedures. Mercer answered in short sentences at first, careful and defensive. He named policy manuals he had not followed, trainings he considered useless, warnings he thought would never matter. Then the questions moved deeper. Who ignored reports? Who laughed off complaints? Who advised officers to write vague narratives? Which supervisors called citizens unreliable before hearing them speak? Mercer rubbed his palms together and started naming names. Not dramatically. Not heroically. Just tiredly. Systems rarely collapse with explosions. More often, they leak. After an hour, Helen stepped out to take a call, leaving Vanessa and Mercer across from each other in the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. He stared at the tabletop for several seconds. "I watched the video again," he said. Vanessa said nothing. He continued. "I kept waiting to see the version where I looked justified." His laugh was dry and embarrassed. It never came. Vanessa folded her hands. Truth can be rude that way. Mercer nodded. "My father was a deputy. He taught me people respected force." "Did he teach you respect?" she asked. The question landed harder than accusation. Mercer swallowed. No. Rain pressed against the morning outside. Somewhere down the hall a copier whirred. Everyday sounds continued while one man met himself honestly for perhaps the first time. "I do not expect sympathy," he said. "Good," Vanessa replied. "Then we can save time." He almost smiled despite himself. "I am trying to understand when I became this person." Vanessa looked at him steadily. "Usually it happens one unchecked moment at a time." Helen returned and resumed the session. By noon, signed statements covered the table. Names of supervisors. Internal shortcuts. Informal retaliation tactics. Patterns confirmed by the very man who once trusted silence to protect him. As the recorder clicked off, Mercer hesitated. "Can I ask one thing?" Helen checked her watch. Briefly. He looked at Vanessa. "Why did you stay calm in the park?" She considered him before answering. "Because anger was what you expected. Calm forced you to meet yourself." Mercer lowered his eyes. For the first time since this began, no one in the room felt the need to say more. Later, as Vanessa stepped outside beneath clearing skies, sunlight broke through the rain clouds in bright slants across the parking lot. The city was drying. So was something else. Fear leaves stains. But not all of them last. 2 weeks later, Maplewood Square was crowded again, but this time nobody came to watch humiliation. They came for the reopening of the community garden beside the fountain, a patch of neglected city land now cleaned, replanted, and lined with fresh benches built by volunteers. Children painted wooden signs with sunflowers and birds. Local musicians tuned guitars under a shade tent. Food trucks returned with longer lines than before. The same place that had once held silence now carried conversation everywhere. Vanessa Brooks arrived just after 10 in the morning wearing jeans, a light blouse, and sunglasses she removed as soon as she stepped into the sun. People recognized her immediately, though many pretended not to stare. Gratitude often looks shy in public. Curtis the mechanic waved from a folding chair. The nurse brought her homemade lemon bars wrapped in foil. The teenage girl who had spoken at City Hall handed Vanessa a thank you card signed by classmates. None of them treated her like a celebrity. They treated her like someone who had reminded them of themselves. That meant more. Near the fountain, a small podium stood beside a new plaque donated by residents. The inscription was simple. This space belongs to everyone. No title beneath it. No politician's name. Just a sentence people could test with their own behavior. Deputy Director Helen Ward attended quietly, standing near the back with coffee in hand, refusing every request to speak first. Communities do not need more officials talking, she told the organizer. They need room. By 11, the mayor gave brief remarks, careful and unusually humble. He announced reforms already underway: independent complaint tracking, mandatory review timelines, expanded de-escalation training, public reporting dashboards, and a civilian advisory board with actual authority rather than decorative titles. The crowd applauded politely, but their loudest cheers came when names of ordinary residents were thanked. Fear had once made them invisible. Now it had introduced them to one another. Then the organizer invited Vanessa to the podium. She paused for a moment, looking over the square where everything had changed and yet still looked the same. Same fountain. Same trees. Same sunlight on the pavement. Places remember what happens there, even when they pretend not to. I am not here because I was stronger than anyone else, she began. I am here because too many people have had smaller moments like mine with no camera, no witness, no follow-up. Heads nodded across the crowd. What changed was not one officer. What changed was that people decided silence had become too expensive. The word settled gently and stayed. She thanked the residents who submitted statements, the workers who did their jobs honestly, and the neighbors who chose courage late rather than never. She did not mention Daniel Mercer by name. Some people no longer deserve free rent in the story. Afterward, while children planted marigolds near the benches, Vanessa stepped aside to answer a phone call. It was her mother. How many people came? Eleanor asked. Vanessa looked around the park, smiling at the noise. A lot. Did they clap too much? Some. Good. Keeps the blood moving. Vanessa laughed. How are you feeling? Hungry, Eleanor said. Which is excellent news. Bring lunch. Yes, Mom. Before hanging up, Eleanor added, I told you calm was stronger. Vanessa glanced at the fountain where sunlight flashed across the water. You told me many things. And eventually you listened to several of them. The line clicked dead. Some mothers end conversations the way judges end hearings. As noon approached, music rose through the square and children ran between tables carrying paint on their hands. Helen walked over and stood beside Vanessa. You did well, she said. Vanessa shook her head. They did. Helen smiled slightly. That is how I know you did. They watched the crowd together in companionable silence. Somewhere beyond the trees, traffic moved, offices buzzed, and another ordinary day continued. But here, in a place once used to embarrass a stranger, people were planting flowers. He had turned on a hose to make someone feel small. In the end, it was the truth that washed the whole city clean.